The unexpected encounter. In the midst of a brutal battlefield, the soldiers' boots crunched over the charred earth as smoke billowed into the sky. Explosions echoed in the distance, and the air was thick with the scent of burning metal. Blood and dust mixed in the soldier's sweat as he moved carefully, his eyes scanning for any signs of life. The soldier, named Ryan, had been in battles before, but this one felt different. The enemy was ruthless, relentless, and merciless. His team had been scattered, and now he was alone. As he crept through the smoke, he spotted something strange ahead, a figure lying motionless in the wreckage. Ryan's heart skipped a beat. At first he thought it was just another casualty of war, but then something about the way the body was positioned made him stop. This wasn't just any soldier. It was an alien. The alien assassin, barely conscious, lay in a pool of her own blood. Her body was covered in strange, dark armor, and her face was hidden by a mask. Ryan had heard stories about these assassins, feared across the galaxy for their brutal efficiency and deadly skills. They were cold, calculating, and deadly in combat. Yet here she was, wounded and vulnerable. He couldn't just leave her there. Ryan's training had taught him many things, but one principle always stuck with him. No one gets left behind, even if it meant saving an enemy. He approached cautiously, his weapon raised just in case she tried to attack. But as he got closer, he saw the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, barely. The decision hit him like a sudden storm. Should he help her? Should he risk everything to save someone who had been trained to kill him? His fingers tightened on the weapon's grip. But something in his gut told him that this was more than just a simple choice between life and death. There was something about the way she lay there helpless that stirred a strange feeling inside him. Compassion? Or was it pity? It didn't matter. If he didn't act, she would die. And if he did, he might be walking into a trap. Still, the thought of leaving her to die alone made his stomach churn. He was a soldier, trained to fight for life, not death. With a deep breath, he lowered his weapon and knelt beside her. Carefully, Ryan placed his hand on her shoulder, trying to gently shake her awake. "Hey, are you alive?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien assassin's eyes fluttered open, revealing bright, fiery yellow irises. For a split second, Ryan felt a jolt of fear. Those eyes weren't just cold, they were calculating, like she was already weighing her chances of survival. But then, she looked confused, disoriented, as if she hadn't expected to be saved. Ryan spoke again, this time a little more firmly. "You're alive. I'm going to help you, but you need to trust me." Her lips barely parted, and for a moment, he thought she was going to attack. Instead, her voice came out hoarse and weak. "You shouldn't be helping me." Ryan wasn't sure what to say. She was right. He shouldn't be helping her, but he couldn't just leave her there to die. "I don't leave people to die. It doesn't matter if you're my enemy. Right now, we're both just survivors." The assassin's expression softened, for a moment, but only for a moment. Then, as if remembering who she was and what she had been trained to do, her eyes narrowed. "If you help me, you'll be my target. I will kill you." Ryan nodded slowly. "Maybe, but not today." Without another word, he carefully lifted her into his arms, ignoring the weight of the situation. His heart pounded, and his mind raced. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but he wasn't going to let this alien die on the battlefield. Not when he still had a chance to do something right. As he moved, the assassin winced in pain, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Ryan kept moving, determined to find shelter and figure out what to do next. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. Taking a wounded enemy into his care was a risky move, one that could cost him everything. But as he carried her away from the chaos of the battlefield, something inside him told him that this moment, this decision, would change everything. He didn't know how or why, but he knew he couldn't just turn his back on her. The air was still thick with smoke, and the sound of battle raged on in the distance. But for Ryan, everything felt distant now. He focused only on the alien assassin in his arms, her soft, labored breathing the only thing keeping him grounded. The journey ahead would be difficult, filled with danger and uncertainty. But one thing was clear. He had made a choice. And there was no turning back. The soldier and the assassin, enemies by nature, were now connected by fate. And this unlikely alliance had only just begun. The unexpected rescue. The air inside the small hidden shelter was cool, a stark contrast to the burning heat outside. Ryan had done everything he could to stabilize the alien assassin, whom he had just dragged to safety from the battlefield. Her breathing had slowed, but she was still unconscious, her face twisted in a mixture of pain and exhaustion. Ryan set her down gently on a makeshift bed of cloth he had found nearby. He wiped the sweat from his brow, feeling the weight of his decision pressed down on him. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into, and part of him regretted it. After all, she was an enemy, a ruthless killer. Yet something inside him wouldn't let him walk away. He couldn't simply abandon someone in need, no matter who they were. He looked down at her. Her armor, now covered in dirt and blood, was still as intimidating as ever. The sleek black surface, with its strange glowing markings, reminded him of the alien technology that had once been used to destroy countless cities. But now, it was just an armor, worn by a broken body. Ryan frowned. Who was she really? What had brought her to this point? The assassin stirred, her eyes fluttering, open, revealing the same sharp yellow gaze that had once sent shivers down his spine. For a moment they stared at each other, silent. Ryan felt his pulse quicken, a sense of dread creeping into his mind. He had saved her life, but what now? You saved me, she rasped, her voice cold and distant. Yet there was a tinge of confusion in it. She had expected to be abandoned or executed, not cared for. The moment seemed to stretch on forever, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a silent challenge. Why? Ryan took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. It wasn't just her voice that unnerved him. It was the uncertainty in her words. She didn't understand why he had made this choice. Maybe, just like him, she was questioning it too. I don't leave people to die, Ryan said, his voice firm yet filled with a quiet conviction. You were on the edge of death. I couldn't just leave you there. The assassin's eyes narrowed. You're a fool, she muttered bitterly. This is a mistake you'll regret. You should have let me die. Ryan's brow furrowed. Maybe. But I didn't. Now we both have to live with that decision. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Ryan could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to suffocate him. He had taken a risk, perhaps the greatest of his life, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to unfold because of it. The assassin's breathing steadied, but her body was still weak. She was in no condition to fight. Ryan took a step back, trying to give her space, but every movement he made seemed to make her more alert. Her instincts were sharp, even in her weakened state. She was calculating, always looking for an advantage. But what she didn't know was that Ryan had no plans to give her an advantage. Not yet. Just as he thought he might get a moment of peace, the ground outside trembled. Ryan froze, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. His mind raced. There were no signs of life nearby. Was it an enemy patrol? Had they found them already? They're coming, the assassin muttered, her voice more alert than it had been a moment ago. She seemed to know exactly what was happening outside. You shouldn't have helped me. You've just signed your own death sentence. Ryan ignored her, scanning the environment for any threats. The shaking intensified, the ground vibrating beneath his feet. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. Figures moving in the distance, their silhouettes just visible through the cracks in the shelter's walls. They were coming. Fast. He cursed under his breath. The enemy had tracked them down quicker than he expected. They were close now. Without thinking, Ryan grabbed the assassin's arm, pulling her to her feet. She staggered, still weak from her injuries, but instinctively she tried to push him away. Let me go, she hissed, her voice full of anger and defiance. Ryan didn't let go. You're coming with me, we're leaving. Her eyes flashed with something he hadn't expected. Fear. You don't understand, she warned, her tone urgent. "They won't stop until they have me. They'll destroy everything in their path to get to me. You're as good as dead if you keep me around." "I'm not leaving you here," Ryan said firmly, pulling her towards the back exit. "You're coming with me whether you like it or not." They stumbled through the darkened corridors of the shelter, Ryan's mind racing. Each step they took brought them closer to the unknown. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing in the still air. They were almost at the exit when the assassin stopped, her body rigid as if she had sensed something. Ryan didn't have time to react before the door slammed open. A group of heavily armed soldiers poured in, their weapons aimed directly at them. Ryan's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't hesitate. He grabbed the alien assassin, pulling her in front of him, using her as a shield. She hissed in protest, but he held her firm. "You'll regret this, human," she muttered, though there was a note of fear in her voice. "They'll kill us, both." Ryan ignored her words, his eyes locked on the soldiers advancing toward them. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about doing whatever it took to keep both of them alive. As the soldiers moved closer, Ryan made his decision. "Move!" he shouted, pushing the assassin forward. The two of them darted into the shadows, leaving the soldiers behind. But the threat still loomed. They had escaped, for now. But Ryan knew this was just the beginning. The fight for survival had only just started, and he didn't know what it would cost them both. A growing bond. The night was quiet. Too quiet. The only sound was the faint crackle of a distant fire and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Ryan and the alien assassin, who he still didn't know the name of, had managed to escape, the soldiers that had been hunting them. They had found refuge in a dense forest far from the shelter they had fled. But they were far from safe. The enemy was still out there, and it wouldn't take long for them to regroup and track their every move. Ryan sat against a tree, his eyes scanning the darkened horizon. He was exhausted, every muscle aching from the relentless fight to survive. But there was no time for rest. Not yet. He had a wounded alien assassin to protect, and every second counted. She had barely spoken since their escape, her face set in a hardened expression. Despite the bond they had formed during their escape, she still kept her distance. But Ryan knew there was more to her than just the cold, deadly assassin persona. He had seen it in the way she had looked at him when he saved her life. There was a flicker of something else, something human, something vulnerable. But there was no time to question it. Their survival was more important than understanding each other right now. As Ryan checked his weapon, the assassin stirred beside him. He glanced over to see her slowly sitting up, her eyes still glowing faintly in the dark. She was watching him, but he didn't know if she trusted him yet. Maybe she never would. "Why didn't you kill me?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was softer now, less cold than before. Ryan looked up, meeting her gaze. "I told you, I don't leave people to die." She scoffed softly, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "I'm an assassin. It's what I do. I'm trained to kill. And you saved me. Why?" He didn't have an answer for her, not one that made sense. He had been taught to fight, to kill when necessary, but he had also been taught to protect, to save those in need. And that's what he had done. Saving her wasn't about logic or reason. It was about doing what felt right in that moment. "Because you weren't supposed to die today," he said finally. "That's all." She looked at him for a long time, as if trying to figure out if he was lying. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her pause. "You really don't know what you've gotten yourself into," she said, her voice quieter now. "You think saving me will change something? I'm a monster human. I'm not someone you want to be around. People like me don't deserve mercy." Ryan shifted, uneasy at her words. "You're not a monster," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're just you. Everyone has their story, their reasons." She looked away, staring into the fire that crackled beside them. For a long time there was only silence. Ryan didn't push her. He knew it would take time. Maybe, just maybe, they were both in this together. But the question still lingered in his mind. How could he keep her safe when she didn't even trust him? The wind picked up and Ryan stood, stretching his stiff muscles. He checked their surroundings once more, but there was no sign of danger. For now, they were safe. But he knew that wouldn't last forever. They couldn't stay here for long. They had to keep moving. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice low but determined. "They'll be looking for us. If we stay here too long, they'll find us. We can't afford that." The assassin nodded slowly, pushing herself to her feet. Her wounds were healing, but slowly. She wasn't at full strength yet, and she knew it. Her pride would never allow her to admit it. But she needed him. As much as she hated it, she needed his help to survive. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice no longer as hostile but guarded. "I don't know yet," Ryan admitted. "We need to find a safe place, somewhere off the grid. I've got a contact in a nearby town. We can lay low there for a while. If we're lucky, we can get a ship off planet, but we're not safe until then." The assassin's eyes narrowed. "A contact? Who?" Ryan hesitated for a moment. "Someone I trust, and if they don't trust you, we'll figure something out." She didn't respond, but the look she gave him said everything. She didn't trust anyone, and she wasn't sure she could trust him either, but she was willing to follow him, for now. As they set out again, moving cautiously through the thick woods, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. The assassin was no longer just the cold enemy he had once feared. There was something more to her, something human, and it scared him. Because the closer he got to her, the harder it would be to let her go. When the time came, hours passed, and the night grew colder. Their journey was slow, every step calculated and deliberate. Ryan was on edge, constantly checking over his shoulder. The enemy could be anywhere. As they approached the town, Ryan's heart sank. The closer they got, the more he realized they were running out of time. They needed to get inside and lay low. But he could already hear the distant hum of engines. They weren't alone. "They're here," Ryan said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to get to the contact now. No more delays." The assassin nodded, her eyes flashing with determination. The bond between them, however fragile, had grown stronger in the past few hours. They had no choice now but to rely on each other. They sprinted toward the town, the sound of enemy forces closing in behind them. The night, once peaceful, was now filled with the pounding of boots, the hum of vehicles, and the rising tension of what was to come. They couldn't afford to be caught. This was their last chance. As they entered the town, the air was thick with suspense. The contact was supposed to be here if they could just find him. But time was running out. Their enemies were closing in fast. And the worst part was, Ryan didn't know if they would make it out alive. The hidden truth? The city was silent, eerily so. The streets, usually bustling with life, were now deserted, save for a few shadows moving in the distance. Ryan kept his grip on his weapon tight as he moved through the narrow alleyways, keeping the assassin close behind him. Every step felt like a countdown. They were running out of time, and the walls of this city were closing in on them fast. The assassin, despite her injuries, moved with a predator's grace. Her senses were sharper than Ryan's, her eyes scanning every corner as if expecting danger to jump out at any moment. She hadn't said a word in hours, and Ryan wasn't sure whether she was still keeping her distance or if she simply had nothing left to say. "We're close," Ryan whispered, glancing over his shoulder at her. "He's waiting at the abandoned warehouse. We just need to get there without attracting attention." The assassin didn't respond. Instead, she merely nodded, her expression unreadable. As they neared the warehouse, Ryan's mind was racing. The contact he was heading toward wasn't just a simple ally. He was someone Ryan had trusted with his life in the past. But things had changed since then. Ryan wasn't sure if that trust still existed. And as for the assassin, well, she had made it clear that she didn't trust anyone, not even him. "You're still not telling me everything," she spoke suddenly, breaking the tense silence between them. Ryan tensed at her words, his heart skipping a beat. She had been quiet for so long it caught him off guard when she spoke. He knew what she was talking about. They hadn't exactly been honest with each other up to this point. But now, with the enemy closing in and their lives hanging by a thread, he knew it was time to share the truth. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously, trying to sound casual despite the growing tension in his chest. She gave him a sidelong glance. "You've been holding back. I can see it in your eyes. You've got secrets. And I'm not stupid enough to think they don't involve me." Ryan sighed, pausing for a moment to think. The truth was complicated. Revealing everything to her was dangerous, not only for him, but for her as well. The assassin didn't need to know everything, at least not yet. But something about her made him feel like it was time to let go of the lies. It was the same feeling he had when he decided to save her life on the battlefield. He leaned against the wall of the alley, his breath steadying. He knew the enemy wasn't far behind. They had only a few minutes before they would be cornered. But he also knew that she needed to hear this, so he decided to speak the truth. All of it. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice low. "There's something you don't know, and I wasn't sure if I should tell you, but I think you deserve to know." The assassin's eyes flickered with interest, but she didn't interrupt him. She simply waited for him to continue. "The truth is," Ryan paused, gathering his thoughts, "I was part of a special mission years ago, a mission to stop a galactic war. I was sent in to infiltrate and eliminate a target, but it wasn't just any target. It was someone like you." The assassin raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me?" "Someone who had been programmed to kill." "A weapon," Ryan explained, his gaze distant as he recalled the past. "But what they didn't tell me was that the person I was sent to eliminate wasn't just a mindless killer. She was like you, someone who had been forced into it. Just like you. She had no choice." "What happened?" she asked, her voice strangely soft now. Ryan could see the flicker of curiosity in her eyes, but he could also see the walls she was putting up, not wanting to show too much emotion. "I couldn't do it," Ryan said quietly. "I couldn't kill her. I saw the humanity in her and I saw what they had done to her. She wasn't evil. She was just a pawn, a weapon they had broken." The assassin's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger in her expression, only recognition. "And what happened to her?" she asked, her tone colder now. "She was killed," Ryan said, his voice heavy with regret. "My superiors didn't care. She was expendable, just like everyone else in this war." A long silence followed. The assassin's eyes were fixed on him, and Ryan couldn't tell what she was thinking. Had she been the same as that woman? Had she been manipulated, just like he had been manipulated to kill her? He didn't know, but something inside him told him that there were deeper layers to her story, layers he hadn't even begun to understand. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet and steady. "So you saved me because of her, didn't you? Because you couldn't let me die the same way?" Ryan nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's part of it." The assassin didn't respond, but Ryan could see the conflict in her eyes. She was processing the information, processing the truth. And for the first time since they had met, he saw a flicker of doubt in her. Doubt about herself. Doubt about everything she had been taught to believe. "You think you're a monster, don't you?" Ryan asked, his voice gentle now, almost as if he were speaking to a wounded animal. The assassin didn't look at him, her gaze locked on the ground. "I've done things that can't be undone." Ryan took a step closer to her. "We've all done things we regret. But that doesn't make you a monster. It just makes you human." She finally met his gaze, and for a moment, the cold wall she had built around herself cracked just a little. "You really believe that?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. Ryan nodded. "I do." Before she could respond, the sound of distant engines reached their ears. The enemy was closing in, and there was no more time for words. Ryan's mind raced. He couldn't afford to let his guard down now, not with the danger so close. "We need to move," he said urgently, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the warehouse. "Talk later. We need to get inside now." The assassin didn't protest. She didn't say a word. She simply followed him, her movements a little more hesitant than before. Ryan could feel it, the subtle shift in her demeanor. Maybe, just maybe, they were both starting to trust each other. But as they neared the warehouse, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The enemies were closing in faster than he had anticipated, and the contact he had hoped would help them might not even be there. If they didn't make it inside soon, they would be trapped. The tension was thick in the air, and the enemy's presence was looming closer with each passing second. Ryan's heart pounded as they approached the door, but even as they rushed toward safety, a sense of dread settled in his stomach. This was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. One he wasn't sure they were ready for. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and then everything went dark. Bonds tested the warehouse was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of a cracked panel on the far wall. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as he led the assassin inside, his instincts screaming at him to keep moving, to get to safety. But every step seemed to echo in the silence as if the entire world were holding its breath. The door clicked shut behind them, and for a moment, they stood in complete darkness. The only sound was their breathing, heavy and labored after the tense journey. Ryan's grip on his weapon tightened, eyes flicking around the shadowy interior. He could sense the danger, the threat that loomed just beyond their reach. But this time it wasn't just the enemy they had to worry about. It was their fragile alliance, one that was already showing signs of strain. "We're inside. Now what?" The assassin's voice cut through the silence, her tone still sharp, but with an edge of uncertainty. It was the first time in a while that her voice had been anything other than cold. Ryan didn't answer immediately. He was still processing everything that had happened. They had escaped the enemy, yes, but it was far from over. They couldn't stay here for long, and even though the warehouse seemed empty, he didn't trust it. Nothing was ever as it seemed. "We wait for the contact," Ryan finally said, his voice low, cautious. "But if they don't show up, if we don't hear from them soon, we move again. No more hesitation." The assassin didn't reply, but her body language was telling. She was tense, on edge. Ryan could feel the weight of her gaze on him, but he didn't turn to meet it. Her distrust was obvious, and in that moment, he couldn't blame her. He had placed her in an impossible situation. They were both outsiders, now untrusted, hunted, alone. And yet in the midst of all that, there was something else. Something between them that Ryan couldn't explain. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was something. The knowledge that they were both survivors, bound together by their shared struggle. That bond, no matter how unlikely, was real. The minutes dragged by, the silence growing thicker with each passing second. Ryan checked his weapon again, making sure it was fully charged and ready. The assassin had sat down on a nearby crate, her back against the wall, her eyes closed. She looked exhausted, but Ryan knew better than to believe she was resting. Her mind was still alert, still calculating. "How long are we supposed to wait?" The assassin's voice was quieter this time, the sharpness replaced with a tinge of frustration. "We wait until we have no choice," Ryan replied, trying to keep the edge out of his voice. "We can't risk moving too soon, not when we're so close." The assassin snorted softly. "You trust them, don't you?" she asked, the words laced with disbelief. "After everything that's happened, you still believe this contact will help us?" Ryan didn't respond right away. The question lingered in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Did he trust the contact? Part of him hoped he did. This person had helped him before, years ago during another mission. But things were different now. People changed, and the war had turned everyone into something darker. "I trust them," Ryan said finally, his voice firm, though he could feel a sense of doubt creeping in. "But if they betray us, we're on our own." The assassin met his eyes. Then and for a moment they just stared at each other. There was something unspoken between them, something raw and honest in the way they looked at each other. They were both soldiers, Both trained for war, but this was different. There was no protocol for what they were going through. No training for the unexpected twists, the survival instincts that were now kicking in at full force. "You're scared," she said, her voice low but surprisingly gentle. Ryan blinked, taken aback. "What?" "You're scared," she repeated, this time with more certainty. "But it's not just fear of the enemy. You're scared of something else. You're scared of what comes next." Ryan didn't know how to respond. He hadn't realized it until she said it. But she was right. There was a nagging feeling in his gut, a gnawing uncertainty. He wasn't just afraid for his life. He was afraid of what he had become by saving her, of what this fragile connection between them meant. And most of all, he was afraid of what would happen when they finally reached the end of this journey, when they had to part ways. The assassin seemed to sense his hesitation, and for a brief moment something flickered in her expression. Maybe it was empathy, maybe it was understanding. But it didn't last. Just as quickly as it appeared, the cold mask was back, hiding whatever vulnerability she had allowed herself to show. "If you think your contact will show up and save you," she said, her voice sharp again, "you're wrong. The galaxy doesn't work like that. No one is coming to help you. You'll have to fight for your survival. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that's all you ever had to rely on." Before Ryan could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the warehouse. They both froze, instantly alert. Ryan's hand went to his weapon, his muscles tense as he scanned the dark space. The footsteps were getting closer, but they were too heavy, too deliberate. This wasn't their contact. "Ready yourself," Ryan murmured to the assassin, who instantly rose to her feet, her eyes narrowing in the direction of the noise. She didn't need to be told twice. They both knew what was coming. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Ryan's breath caught. It wasn't who he expected. Standing there, framed by the faint light, was a man wearing a dark cloak, his face obscured. His presence was imposing, his every movement calculated. "You're not who I thought you were," Ryan said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes scanning the room before finally landing on Ryan. His gaze was cold, calculating, but it wasn't hostile, not yet. "You're in my territory now, soldier," the cloaked figure finally said, his voice low but carrying an undeniable authority. "And you've led them straight to me." Before Ryan could respond, the unmistakable sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, echoing through the walls of the warehouse. Their time had run out. The enemy was here and they had nowhere to run. The man in the cloak looked back at the entrance, then back at Ryan. "You should have never come here," he muttered. Ryan's mind raced. They had no choice but to fight, to survive, or they would be trapped. But now, with this new threat looming before them, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The stakes were higher than ever, and he wasn't sure if they could win this battle. The assassin stepped forward, her eyes burning with a familiar fire. "If we're going down," she said, "we're going down fighting." Ryan nodded, his jaw clenched. The battle was upon them, and the bond they had forged in the chaos of survival was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. The first shot rang out, and the fight for their lives began. Secrets revealed. The first shot rang out, piercing the tension that had gripped the air. Ryan instinctively dropped to the ground, pulling the assassin with him. The bullet grazed his shoulder, a sharp sting of pain that only sharpened his focus. He didn't have time to think about the wound. The fight had started, and everything they had worked for had led to this moment. The cloaked figure, still standing in the shadows, was already moving. His speed was inhuman, calculated. He was no ordinary ally or enemy. He was a ghost, a predator, and Ryan realized, with a sickening certainty, that the man had been waiting for this moment. The ambush wasn't a coincidence. They had been lured, here right into a trap. Ryan's mind raced, adrenaline flooding his system. He couldn't let the assassin get caught up in the chaos. She might be injured, but she was still dangerous. He needed to get her to safety, but every exit was blocked by hostile forces closing in on them from all sides. "Move!" Ryan shouted, pulling the assassin to her feet. She was still recovering from her injuries, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. If anything, the imminent danger seemed to fuel her determination. But before they could make a move, the cloaked figure stepped forward, his hand raised, a silent command that stopped them both in their tracks. "You really think you can escape?" he said, his voice laced with dark amusement. "You're not leaving here alive, none of you are." Ryan gritted his teeth, holding his weapon steady. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice filled with defiance. The figure's lips curled into a cold smile, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly pulled back the hood of his cloak, revealing a face that Ryan instantly recognized. A face from his past, one he never thought he'd see again. You're supposed to be dead," Ryan muttered, his voice faltering as a wave of disbelief washed over him. The man standing before them wasn't just some nameless enemy. He was Captain Drake, a former ally, a soldier who had fought beside Ryan years ago during the early days of the war. They had shared missions, risks, and even camaraderie, but that was before Drake disappeared, presumed dead after a catastrophic mission that went horribly wrong. Drake's cold eyes glinted with an unsettling calm. "You thought I was dead, didn't you?" he said, his voice like ice. "But the truth is, I've been watching you, watching all of you." Ryan's mind spun as he tried to process what he was hearing. Everything they had done, all their decisions, their path to survival, it had all been manipulated. He had trusted Drake, and Drake had betrayed him. But why? What was his purpose now? Why was he working against them? "What do you want from us?" Ryan's voice was raw with anger, but it was clear he was no longer the man he used to be. The war had hardened him, and this betrayal stung deeper than any physical wound. Drake chuckled softly, his eyes scanning both Ryan and the assassin as if they were nothing more than pawns in a game. "I want you to understand the truth. The truth about your precious alliance. The truth about what we've all become." Ryan's grip tightened on his weapon. He wasn't sure whether he was ready to hear the truth, but something about Drake's tone made him feel like there was no choice but to listen. Everything they had fought for, every decision that had led them here, was about to unravel. "The galaxy doesn't work the way you think it does, Ryan," Drake continued, his voice cold, methodical. "All these wars, all these battles, they're all part of something bigger, something that's been in motion long before either of us even picked up a weapon." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. What was Drake talking about? What was this bigger picture he referred to? "You weren't supposed to save her," Drake said, pointing at the assassin with an almost dismissive gesture. "You were never meant to make it out alive. The whole point was for you to fail, for her to fail. But you—" He paused, his lips curling into a sneer. "You just had to go and ruin it." The assassin's eyes flashed with fury. "You think I'm some pawn?" she hissed, stepping forward, but Ryan grabbed her arm, holding her back. "What are you talking about?" Ryan demanded, his voice hard now, though a pit had opened in his stomach. "What's this all about?" Drake's eyes gleamed with an unsettling satisfaction. "You think this war is about power, resources, survival?" He shook his head. "It's about control, all of it. You're nothing more than tools in a larger game. The real question is, do you even understand who's really controlling it all?" Ryan didn't speak for a long moment. His mind was racing, but nothing made sense. Drake had been a trusted comrade. How could he have known all of this? Why hadn't he told Ryan the truth earlier? "You're too late," Drake said, his voice suddenly colder. "The wheels are already turning. By the time you even begin to understand what's happening, it will be too late. The galaxy's fate is already sealed." "No," the assassin said firmly, her voice sharp and unwavering. "You're wrong. There's always a way out. There's always a choice." Drake's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. "Choices? You think you have a choice?" "The galaxy doesn't care about choices. It never has." Before Ryan could respond, a low rumble filled the air, growing louder and louder until the ground beneath them shook. It was faint at first, but then the unmistakable sound of a ship landing nearby made their blood run cold. Drake's men were already here. They had already surrounded the warehouse. "They're here," Drake said, his voice almost sounding pleased. "The endgame has begun." Ryan's heart hammered in his chest. They were out of time. There was no way they were going to survive this unless they fought back. Everything had been leading up to this moment, but the enemy was already inside, closing in with every passing second. "We're not going down without a fight," Ryan said, his voice steely. "Not today." The assassin looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then without a word she nodded. She had made her choice. They were in this together, no matter what Drake or anyone else had planned. As the first wave of enemy soldiers stormed the warehouse, Ryan and the assassin moved into position. They had no choice now but to fight. The stakes had never been higher. The future of the galaxy was at risk, and the truth was darker than they could have ever imagined. They might not survive this fight, but one thing was certain. Their battle was far from over. A new beginning. The warehouse was now a battleground. Every corner was filled with the sounds of chaos, gunfire, shouting, and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the ground. Ryan and the assassin were fighting side by side, their movements synchronized, each one an extension of the other. Adrenaline surged through their veins, making them faster, stronger, more dangerous than they ever thought they could be. The enemy was relentless. Drake's soldiers moved with precision, their guns raised and trained on Ryan and the assassin, but the two of them fought like cornered animals, their backs against the wall and their survival instinct stronger than any fear. Ryan could hear the distant whine of blaster fire as it zipped past him, but he didn't flinch. He was focused. He had to be. The assassin's movements were fluid, deadly, and every strike she made sent an enemy crashing to the ground. She was a force of nature, her body as lethal as the weapons in her hands. And yet, in the middle of all the bloodshed and destruction, there was something else, a shared understanding between them, an unspoken connection. "We have to make it to the control room," Ryan shouted over the chaos, his voice rough from the exertion, but filled with purpose. "We can't let them shut down the system." The assassin gave him a brief glance, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Lead the way," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. She had changed in the time they'd spent together. There was a part of her that had been buried deep down, something vulnerable, something human. But it was no longer buried. It was there, raw and real. And it was part of the reason they were still alive. The two of them pushed through the dark hallways of the warehouse, the walls lined with flickering lights and the distant sound of enemies closing in. Ryan's heart was pounding, his thoughts racing as he calculated their next move. They had no choice but to make it to the control room. The enemy was about to launch an attack on the entire city, and if they didn't stop it, everything they had fought for would be destroyed. As they rounded a corner, they encountered more resistance. Soldiers emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. The assassin moved like a shadow, her blade slicing through the air with precision. She was a blur of deadly motion, and within moments, the soldiers were down, their bodies scattered across the floor. "We're almost there," Ryan said, breathing heavily but determined. He could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on him. They were running out of time, and the closer they got to the control room, the more he realized how close they were to victory or destruction. Just as they reached the door to the control room, a familiar voice echoed through the comms. It was Drake's voice, cold and mocking. "You really think you can stop this?" Drake's voice crackled, the sound of his laughter sending a chill down Ryan's spine. "You have no idea what you're up against." Ryan's fists clenched. The man who had once been a trusted ally had become something else entirely. Drake was no longer human, not in any way that Ryan could recognize. He had become a monster, and he had been orchestrating everything from the shadows. "We'll stop you, Drake," Ryan shouted, his voice filled with a newfound strength. "Whatever it takes." "You'll never make it in time," Drake responded, his voice oozing with arrogance. "I've already won. The bomb is set. The countdown has begun. You're too late." The door to the control room slid open and Ryan and the assassin rushed inside, guns raised, ready for whatever awaited them. The control room was a mess of screens, buttons, and flashing lights. The central terminal was alive with data, but the bomb timer was already ticking down. No, Ryan muttered, his heart sinking. It's already begun. The assassin's eyes scanned the terminal. There has to be a way to stop it, she said urgently. Find the override now. Ryan moved quickly, his hands flying across the terminal, trying to make sense of the complex interface. Every second felt like an eternity. Sweat dripped down his face, his pulse racing as he fought against the clock. Hurry! The assassin shouted, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting the walls to close in on them at any moment. Finally, Ryan found it. The override. With a sharp breath, he punched in the sequence, his hands shaking with anticipation. The timer blinked, then paused. It's not stopping, Ryan muttered, panic creeping into his voice. But before he could try again, the doors to the control room slammed shut. The lights flickered, and the air seemed to grow thicker with tension. The assassin turned, ready for another fight, but Drake was standing in the doorway, his eyes dark with intent. You really thought you could stop me? Drake sneered, his voice cold. This is bigger than you, Ryan. Bigger than all of you. Ryan stepped in front of the assassin, his weapon aimed at Drake. This ends now. Drake's smirk never faltered. You don't understand, do you? You've been part of the plan all along. This war, this battle was never about winning. It was about creating chaos. And in chaos, the real power emerges. You, me, her. He gestured at the assassin. We're nothing more than tools. And tools are expendable. The assassin's gaze turned to Drake, her expression fierce. You've lost your mind, she spat. Drake's eyes gleamed. No, I found it, and you're just too blind to see it. In that moment, something shifted in Ryan. Everything Drake had said, everything he had done, it all clicked into place. This was never about survival. This was never about saving the galaxy or stopping a war. It was about control. And Drake had been pulling the strings all along, but Ryan wasn't going to let him win. Not now, not ever. You're wrong, Ryan said, his voice cold and firm. You're just a coward hiding behind all of this. You want control? You can have it, but you'll never control us. With a swift motion, Ryan lunged forward, firing a single shot at the control panel. The explosion rocked the room, sending sparks flying as the timer on the bomb blinked out. No! Drake shouted, his eyes wide with fury. But it was too late. The bomb's countdown had stopped. Ryan and the assassin stood in the wreckage of the control room, breathing heavily, the tension finally beginning to ebb away. But the war was far from over. Drake was still out there, and the galaxy was still teetering on the edge of collapse. But for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt a glimmer of hope. They had won. For now. The assassin turned to him, her eyes meeting his with something that resembled gratitude. She didn't say anything, but her eyes spoke volumes. They were in this together. Whether by fate or by choice, they had become allies, survivors, and perhaps something more. Ryan looked at her, his expression determined. Let's finish this. The battle wasn't over. But together, they had a chance to change the future. And no matter what came next, they would fight until the very end.